Off in the salty ocean, off where the waves roll free. The sparkling water rises, then crashes to the sea. Out amongst the breakers, you'll have no need to fear. It's true, it's the blue frontier.
Welcome to another episode of Rising Tide, the Ocean Podcast. This is David Helvarg, and today I'm joined by Natasha Benjamin of Blue Frontier. You might recall a few months back when I interviewed Natasha and Anna Blanco about their award-winning documentary, Sequoias of the Sea, that tells the story of Northern California's kelp forest loss and its human impacts on the people of Fort Bragg, California. So, turnaround's fair play. Take it away, Natasha.
Yes, David. Today, I get the privilege of interviewing you, David Helvarg, who I've known for many years. Just a little background on David. For those who don't know, David is the founder and executive director of Blue Frontier. He's written 7 books. His print work has appeared in the New York Times, the LA Times, Smithsonian, National Geographic. He is also the executive producer of Sequoias of the Sea, in addition to dozens of other documentaries for PBS, Discovery, and more. And today I am very excited to talk about one of my favorite issues, kelp, and David's new book, Forest of the Sea, The Remarkable Life and Imperiled Future of Kelp. And for me, this book is so important because it's one of the most important unknown climate stories of our time. Everyone's talking about climate change, but no one is talking about kelp. So let's start with your connection to seaweed. This is something that you've been talking about in your other books, but never dedicated an entire book to. Obviously something you're familiar with. Tell us why seaweed? Why now?
Well, it's funny because early on in Blue Frontier, we had a big poster. It says, "Be a seaweed rebel." That was the last chapter of my first ocean book, Blue Frontier. Seaweed rebels, but I just meant it was a metaphor. It was like grassroots activists, grassroots ocean activists being the seaweed rebels. And I got a lot of emails and notes from, I'm a phycologist and I've been studying seaweed for 50 years. And I'm like, no, that's not what it's about. But the only resource not fully exploited in the ocean is good storytelling. And one of the dramatic stories that you experienced as a surfer and I saw as well was the loss of California's kelp forest. My last book, The Golden Shore, California's Love Affair with the Sea, was all about how California, the 4th largest economy in the world, 40 million people, were doing well by the coast and ocean, or kind of a model of solutions. But even as that book was coming out, the kelp forests of Northern California were disappearing. And nobody knew about it. I mean, there was like very little awareness even in California that there was this tremendous crash of the ecosystem of kelp forests. It's an ocean climate disaster nobody knows about. And so I got the contract to go out and do what I like to do, which is spend a couple of years looking at an issue that's underreported and do a lot of diving in California and traveling in Alaska and Maine and also overseas in Turkey and Taiwan and Palau and seeing this global disaster that's taking place. Kelp's the new coral. This is the Amazon forest of the sea. It actually covers 2.2 million square miles, more territory than the Amazon. It's this essential system that generates a lot of our oxygen and provides habitat for all sorts of critters all over the world. Almost a third of the temperate coastal seas have kelp forests, but they're going away rapidly. And no one had really done that sort of broad general look at it. And
right.
But you've gotten the preview read of it. It'll actually not be out till May 5th.
Yes, I've been one of the fortunate ones who's been able to read the book. And I think what's so special about it is obviously it's touching on this really important climate issue, kelp, but it's also telling the stories of the different communities and the different people that are involved in this story. Of course, I have to highlight the Fort Bragg chapter, which is really the story of our film, Sequoias of the Sea as well, which highlights what's happening here in California. Very local issue, 95% loss of kelp over a very short period of time. extremely devastating to that community. But what we realized when we were making the film, and as you were obviously been writing the book, is that this is a global story, right? And that's what's so remarkable about the book is you get to dive into the other pieces of the kelp story.
And of course, because we're there at the same time, we got some of the same scenes. My chapter ends where your film ends.
Yes.
Touching scene with the guy whose dad built up the dive shop that then collapsed after the collapse of the kelp because that shop was so dependent on the recreational.
The abalone divers. Yep.
And years later, he reopens a sort of water recreation shop the next town down in Mendocino, and he's taking his 2 young boys to the edge, and the kelp there is mostly gone. And he's like, but there's a little bit left. He goes, what do you think? And his older son, who's about 8, goes, wow, it's amazing. It's like the last survivors. And that's kind of, it's heartbreaking and it's scary because there are still healthy kelp beds out there in Patagonia and southern Chile and Argentina, even here in California. I just ended the book diving in Catalina, which has still largely intact, beautiful kelp there and in the Channel Islands. But so much of it has been lost around the world. 60% globally is either lost or degraded to some degree. It's very challenging. People know coral's in trouble, and people who really look at it know it's due to warming waters. But mostly it's these bleaching events that have gone global. And the same warm water blobs or marine heat waves are impacting kelp in their cold, nutrient-rich waters around the world. And I also have a chapter, Kelp is the New Coral, because there's so many parallels.
Exactly. And we can easily go down this loss, this tremendous loss. But like Sylvia says in the book and in the film, we still have 50% left of the kelp. And now we need to figure out how to protect what's left and restore what we've lost. And there's amazing stories in the book about restoration happening in California, happening in Maine, happening in Alaska.
The good, bad news is that I've been out diving and looking at coral restoration efforts, and these coral folks get really excited if they cement a fragment of branching coral on a dead reef, and a year later it's grown 12 inches, and they're like jazzed. Once you clear out urchins and restore the balance for the kelp spores to regrow, they can grow 100 feet in a year. So I went diving with Tom Ford of the Bay Foundation down in Southern California, in an area where they've restored 80 acres. It's been over the last decade, but they had to clear out 6 million urchins to allow the kelp to come back. But it comes back like gangbusters. There was a mudslide, a landslide that took out an acre of that kelp. And as soon as the water cleared, 2 years later, it was a healthy kelp forest again.
Yeah. And we're seeing up on the North Coast as well, off the town of Mendocino and Big River, where they've removed urchins and then done kelp enhancement. They've seen 900% increase in kelp in those locations. But these locations are really small, right? This is like little pinpoints along the coast where we're seeing the restoration and the recovery. The fear is that the next marine heat wave comes along, which is happening right now as we speak, that it's going to wipe out all of that effort.
Yeah, the scientist I spoke to down in Tasmania, he says, we can do restoration, but it's expensive. And the next heat wave, it can take out the kelp again. He says, and if we don't get off fossil fuels by the end of this century, we lose the coral, we lose the kelp. The challenge is sort of localized, creating the education and learning and support for kelp, both restoration where it's been damaged or protection where they're still healthy, and there are extensive healthy kelps in like the southern cone of Latin America and off the Falklands, aka Malvinas, and Norway. And because they're winners and losers in climate change, I mean, the heat's impacting most of the kelp, but in some places, like off South Africa, the southern winds along the Cape have actually increased, and they're blowing the warm water offshore, allowing the nutrients to rise. And so you've seen expansion of kelp around the Horn there, or up in Norway where the water is warming enough for the native edible crabs to start expanding into areas that had transitioned into urchin barrens. And so now these voracious crabs are eating the urchins, and they're sort of the national heroes. There's different sets of invasive crabs and native crabs. 3 cheers for the native crabs who belong there and love to eat the urchins. And then the Svalbard, this huge Arctic peninsula north of Norway. It's a Norwegian territory. And there, the retreating sea ice has seen a huge expansion of the kelp forest. But the Arctic is warming 3 to 4 times at the rate of the world as a whole. So it's kind of like go see it while it's there, because this kelp's expanding, but at the same time as the sea ice retreats, the glaciers are melting. It could bring a lot of mud and gravel down on these kelp beds and basically take them out again in a few years. So we're in these changing seas, and people don't realize how dramatically they're being impacted.
Yeah, constant flux and changes in time frames that we could have never imagined. Losing an entire ecosystem in less than 10 years. I was always a fish person. I've been working in ocean conservation and marine science and policy for 20 years, and I was always focusing on the fish. And then I started to see the kelp forest disappear before my very own eyes, and I became completely obsessed about seaweed and kelp, and now totally got the kelp bug. But why should people care about kelp? Why is kelp important? Why is this such an important ecosystem in the big ocean picture? Most people think of seaweed, they think it's gross, it's on the beach, it's stinky, or you're a surfer and you get stuck in it and it bothers you. Like, why should we be caring about kelp?
Because like coral, it's a source of a lot of our food, as well as the biodiversity that serves us all. It protects the shores from erosion, from wave damage and storms. But it's also among the critters that depend on the kelp forest somewhere in their life cycle. A lot of critters we really value, maybe because we're predators ourselves. So salmon, herring, crabs, cod, they're all dependent in their lives on the kelp forest acting as nurseries and protection for them in their juvenile stage. It's like the bamboo of the sea. It's so fast growing and also decaying, and everybody who's not hunting in the kelp forest is eating it and living off of it. And I think what both of us want to do, and Blue Frontier is going to do with its kelp education and learning project, i.e. kelp, is just try and make people at least as aware of the role of kelp as we are of the beautiful coral reefs. And of course, I asked Sylvia Silver Earle, I say, why do people know coral, not kelp? She goes, because like everybody likes the warm water. They want to be comfortable, and it's not comfortable. It's beautiful, but you can't touch anything. It's also sensitive. If you touch it, you might hurt it. People are aware of coral more than kelp. I can just read you the opening paragraphs on my chapter, Kelp is the New Coral. You say, what's the difference? Coral and kelp are the ivory and ebony of ecosystems, mirrored opposites. Coral thrives in warm, clear, low-nutrient waters. Kelp in cold, nutrient-rich waters that tend to be murky because of all those nutrients. Coral depends on herbivores such as parrotfish and sea turtles to keep algae in check. Kelp is algae, depends on predators like sea otters and lobsters to keep herbivores in check. Both are foundational species that act as habitat for thousands of other species, including marine mammals, fish, and invertebrates. Kelp, which is an algae along with marine plants like seagrasses and mangroves, produce about 20% of the oxygen we breathe. Phytoplankton in the ocean produces another 50%. I mean, it's 70% of all the oxygen that's generated and carbon dioxide that's absorbed in the photosynthetic cycle is absorbed by the ocean, which makes sense. 71% of our photosynthetic planet surface is ocean.
Most people don't think about that. Let's say that one more time.
70% of our oxygen comes from ocean plants and algae.
That's a big deal. That's a lot. And if we don't have a healthy ocean and we don't have a healthy kelp forest, then that whole system crashes.
No breathing. But beyond that, I mean, people eat kelp, not so much in the US, but in Asia, there's edible seaweeds. 40 million tons per year is harvested. Seaweed is a major food group. The FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, thinks that seaweeds and kelps will outpace potatoes as a food crop by the end of the century.
So now
But-
we're shifting into growing seaweed, which is part of this conversation. We've got our wild kelp that is declining in many places and we need to protect it. But we also have this other industry around farming seaweeds and kelp. And that's one of your chapters,
Forest to farms.
Forest to farm, that's it.
Kind of like the agricultural revolution of 10,000 years ago, only it's happening now and it's got some really positive aspects to it. This is a sustainable, healthy, climate neutral food system. People are becoming aware of kelp mostly as a crop. People are aware that seaweed is a crop that people are growing in aquaculturally developed countries like China and Japan and Korea. And what a lot of people don't realize, a lot of indigenous farmers do, of course, like Dune Lankard, who I went out on the water with in Cordoba, Alaska. He was pointing out, he says, the wild kelp is the mother seed. We can't have a seaweed industry. And he says, when the seaweed industry and the commercial fishermen, they need to contribute more to the efforts for restoration, because without the wild kelp, you're not going to have the farmed kelp. And also with the changing ocean temperatures, you got to start moving around where you're going to grow it and when. A lot of the Alaska kelp farmers thinking that their future market might be China, because a lot of where they're growing in South China, it's getting too warm for the big farming efforts.
It's about the sea, the science, the struggle, and the stories of the people fighting to keep the ocean alive. My name is Holden Hardcastle, and I'm an editor and producer of Rising Tide. Join us for a live podcast event at KALW Studio Event Space on Friday, April 24th, wrapping up SF Climate Week 2026. It's all happening at 220 Montgomery Street in downtown San Francisco. David Helvarg will be interviewing Louis Soyas, Academy Award-winning director of The Cove and the new Netflix documentary, The Plastic Detox. David Helvarg will be signing copies of his new book, Forest of the Sea, following the event. Tickets are pay what you want, and you can find out more information at kalw.org. The ocean's got a lot to say. Come on out and hear it live.
It's a global concern. People say, well, I don't want to eat seaweed because you're an American and you have limited tastes. But it doesn't matter. You're already eating it all the time. The stems of the kelp, they're like 70% cellulose, but they're 30% algin. And that algin is used in all sorts of food and medical and pharmaceutical and cosmetic products. In the 1920s, when we got refrigeration, ice cream became popular, but it was more ice than cream, and the adding of alginate elements put the cream in ice cream. The Kelco, which used to be a big harvester of kelp down in San Diego, when I first moved there, they still had their big boats, like big mower boats, cropping,
mowing down
the top 4 feet of Point Loma kelp beds. And that all went into like pudding and cosmetics and shampoo and even beer to keep a foamier head. And it's nowadays, of course, they're looking at all sorts of additional uses in bioplastics and clothing and materials. And it's a good healing gel for burns.
It's in cosmetics. So people are not just eating it, they're using it for all of these products. We're using kelp every day in all these things that we do.
Processed foods, they found that when they got into quick foods at post World War II, and they found that these compound meats wouldn't, even if you put a lot of sodium and salt in them, they wouldn't stick together. But the algin allowed them to stick together, so you could form things like chicken nuggets.
Right.
So it's got uses both spectacular and gross, but essential in the modern food and pharmaceutical industries. And it's funny because also purple urchins were really valued as lab specimens for embryonic studies. There are these cycles, trophic cascades. Jim Estes was the one who discovered them up in the Aleutians in the 1970s, which is you'll have a kelp forest, and the sea otters were the predators he discovered kept the kelp forest healthy because they ate so many
predator.
Yeah, they ate the in that case mostly urchins. And so when we went down to 2,000 otters, they almost wiped out all the otters on Earth. Then the urchins overgrazed, the kelp forest went away, and you had urchin barrens. more recently with marine heat waves is the blob. And I have chapter 3 is the blobs, the zombies, and the algae labs. Yeah, this marine heat wave came in and it weakened the kelp. But what happened at the same time, there was this virulent disease, sea star wasting disease, that basically wiped out all the sea stars on the West Coast. And the last real predator on these purple urchins were these sea stars. When they disappeared, all these little urchins that mostly lived in hidey holes in the rugged, rocky bottom emerged and said, hey, there's no predators left. And they went crazy and they reproduced 10,000% and they took out all the kelp. And you've had this shift, habitat shift from this abundant forest that sustained over 1,000 other species within it to basically these urchin barons. They call them zombies because when they've eaten all the kelp, they can go into this dormant state where they sort of self-starve but can live for 40 to 70 years.
Empty, no uni, no gonads, nothing in them, but they're still there. And when the food comes back, they come back to life like a zombie.
Like a zombie. And people are trying to figure out what to do with them.
One solution that folks are looking at is, what do we do with all these urchins? We can smash them, we can pull them out of the ocean and compost them. But what if we could create a market for them? What if we could get people to eat them? So not everyone loves uni. I'm a fan, but not everyone. David, not so much. But they're getting creative, and they're the Noyo Center up in Mendocino, and there's a couple other farms along the coast that are taking these empty purple urchins, bringing them on land, feeding them, fattening them up, and selling them to restaurants.
And another idea that I read in Sunset Magazine, along with a shout out to your documentary, is some women who were like trying to turn it into tabletop counters, kitchen counters made of purple urchin, and it looks pretty attractive.
Yeah, it's like a bio marble. It's made out of urchins and it's purple, and it's another great way to tell the story. But we know that these kind of solutions that we are removing urchins, creating markets for them, creating countertops is not going to stop this problem that we're having, which is massive biodiversity loss due to changing ocean conditions, warming oceans, and climate change. So what do people do? How do we help the kelp? And what's happening at the federal level and the state level that we can all get involved in?
We have a Blue Movement directory now of about 2,000 groups that do general ocean conservation in the U.S. We want to create a directory so that people can find their local kelp activists and connect with them. And we want to bring more people together, like the coral scientist and the kelp scientist could teach each other a lot about restoration efforts. There's legislation in Washington, D.C. that's been introduced by, among others, one of our forthcoming Peter Benchley Ocean Award policy winners, Jared Huffman, Congressman of Northern California, legislation that he thinks could actually get bipartisan support. In South Korea, the fisheries agency figured out long ago this is a food security issue. So they invest $29 million a year in restoration, and they've grown 50,000 acres they've brought back, and they plan to restore 150,000 acres by 2030. Mm-hmm. And
the Kelp Forest Alliance
has a report that says for $14 billion, we could restore like 2.5 million acres and protect another 10 million. My numbers aren't exact there, but the idea is we can do it on scale. And the value of all the services in terms of storm protection, food, all of the diversity that's provided, the kelp itself and the way it's used in different products.
Supporting local communities, yes.
$500 billion a year. So for $14 billion investment, you get a $500 billion return. But it won't happen until there's a constituency, and there won't be a constituency until people are aware that some of the big ocean climate issues are kelp and coral and krill down in Antarctica, and people aren't aware of how much that the ocean absorbs 90% of the heat we've generated since the Industrial Revolution. NOAA, the scientists who are still allowed to function there, just reported that last year the ocean was hotter than it's ever been before. And again, much of the kelp that's out there is in trouble. But I still believe that there's opportunities.
There's a few steps to trying to help the kelp. One is awareness. People need to know what the issue is. 2, create the political will to create the change. And we know this is a climate story. So ultimately, this is about stopping using fossil fuels and shifting the way that our systems do things.
Right. And also, it's people shouldn't despair, because sometimes even disasters, the present, when we're recording this, there's still the ongoing war and the Hormuz Straits is closed. We're having a global disaster as a result, but we're also discovering that countries like Spain and China that have moved rapidly towards clean, renewable energy are being less impacted than those that are fully dependent on oil and natural gas.
Exactly.
So I think we just keep having these oil shocks that keep reminding us that we need to transition. And if we do transition, then we might have a hope of recovery for our kelp, our corals, our living seas, and all we get from them, even if we don't know how much we get from them every breath we take.
We want to encourage people to go to your website, which is forestoftheseabook.org, and pre-order the book, which is coming out on May 5th.
And if you pre-order on the website or through Princeton University Press, you can get a 30% discount. So
we'll put that in the show notes, our coupon. And please also go to sequoiasofthesea.org to our Take Action page to learn different ways to get involved and help the kelp.
And just check us out at bluefront.org, because we're serious. We want to do a whole kelp educational learning project and just start connecting everybody around, this forgotten ocean climate wonderland.
Yes. Thank you, David Helvarg, for being on the Rising Tide Ocean podcast and flipping the script a little bit today. And we can't wait to talk more next time.
Thanks, Natasha.
Thank you for joining us on the Rising Tide Ocean podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and leave us a review or share it with your friends and other ocean lovers. Follow us on Instagram and visit bluefront.org for more updates and additional resources. Rising Tide is a production of Blue Frontier, co-hosted by David Helvarg and me, Vicki Nichols-Goldstein of the Inland Ocean Coalition, with production support from Holden Hardcastle of Fluid Studios, Natasha Benjamin, and Nick Paz, and editing services provided by Charles Landon of Studio Cape May. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay hopeful and stay salty.
Off in the salty ocean, off where the waves roll free. The sparkling water rises, then crashes to the sea. Out amongst the breakers, you'll have no need to fear. It's true, it's the blue frontier. Off in the salty ocean, off to the blue frontier.
Sparky, come here, buddy. Sparky! There you are. Good boy, Sparky.